Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, it's December time, which means our twice yearly ranking series are well underway, and this is going to be the part 9. So far we have ranked all the 2022 buffs, 2022 new champions, all the classes in their respective strength order, and we have made all the way to top 2 strongest classes in my opinion, which is exactly where the big disclaimer comes in. The intent of these videos is not to insult your family's honor or try and paint your favorite champions in unflattering light. On the contrary, this is meant to be food for thought, conversation, a discussion, and this is a mixture of my personal views and current in-game trends. We all do have different things that we value in game, different mastery setups that we prefer to run, different game modes that we focus on, different levels of progression that we're at, and it doesn't mean that one thing is necessarily better than other or one opinion matters so much more than somebody else's. It just means that this is my opinion, this is the way I see the game, and this is how I reflect the champion relationships in this game, because I do personally believe that all of the champions that exist in this game are competing for our attention, our catalysts, our time to learn them, and our affection ultimately. And it is clear that some champions are doing much better, that everybody wants to have or use or enjoy, and then there are champions who don't do as well and appear a lot less in champions rosters as viable ranked up champions that they rely on day to day. All that being said, I have adjusted the way I'm doing these champion rankings from previous years, and I am primarily focusing on the more competitive aspects of the game. If I had to put some sort of point structure, let's say that 1/3 of the points would come from questing and challenge content and things like that, your CAV, whatever else, then about 1/3 of the points would come from Alliance War presence, and about 1/3 of the points would come from Battlegrounds presence, because that is where losing matters, that is where failing matters more. Because if you die in a casual quest, you have farmed a revive, no harm, no foul. If you die in Alliance War, you can potentially be letting down 29 other people. Likewise in Battlegrounds, if you do screw up there, it does affect your rankings. And ultimately, I do personally believe if a champion is successful at the very top of the game, where the most dedicated and knowledgeable people in the game entrust their resources to these champions and utilize them to achieve the best results possible, then those champions will also do incredibly well in every other area of the game, like CAV. The fact of the matter is that CAV is designed to make as many champions look broken as busted, so somebody doing fast CAV clear lanes, does not necessarily give much value to the champion. Fact of the matter is, you can do majority of the fights in this game with like Iron Patriot. You're going to take longer, it's going to be harder, but you can do it. So ultimately, I believe champions find value when losing matters in the more competitive aspects of the game. All that being said, again, I fully understand if other people have different definitions of value in the game and so on and so forth, and we're all different altogether. But let's get to it. So, all the ranking will also quite drastically change, and it will exactly demonstrate why Science class has jumped up to the 3rd spot and effectively overtaking mutants, and is, in my opinion, the 2nd strongest class in the game. Ultimately, whenever asked a question which would be the one class that I would personally want to have access to in order to be able to tackle as much content as possible, I would go Science class, because I do think that Science class can accomplish the most. That is not to say that they are necessarily the most convenient or strongest class and stuff like that, but that is to say that I think you can find almost everything that you need in the game in this class, with all the immunities, with all the access to different types of debuffs, damage over time effects. The only thing obviously that Science class struggles with is buffs, because buff immunity or no buff champions is kind of the signature card there. But other than that, they can kind of pretty much do everything. And the old ranking was as follows: number 1, Torch; number 2, Mr. Fantastic. That was somewhat controversial at the time. Number 3, Spider-Man 2099. Number 4, Cap Infinity War. Number 5, Mr. Negative. Number 6, I-Bomb. 7, Overseer. 8, Scorpion, just because he was brand new at the time. And then we have 9, I-Hulk, and 10, Void. And now there are several champions that do not make this list, and I will address that pretty much immediately. And I know a lot of you are going to be extremely upset with me off the go, basically, because Spider-Man 2099 does not appear in this list. I do think there are 10 better science champions, and again, let me explain the point of these and ranking of these, where if the champion is extremely good in one game mode, but hardly sees any game time in much of else, you know, he's not going to make the list. It's similar case with Sunspot, for instance. He's phenomenal battlegrounds attacker in specific metas, but other than that, you know, people don't use him Alliance War offensively, defensively, and people don't necessarily go to him as their main questing champion. And it's kind of similar case with Spider-Man 2099. He's not necessarily very popular standard questing champion or Act 7 or Act 8 champion. He can do some things there, but, you know, he's getting, let's say, mediocre points there, in my opinion, or slightly above average. Alliance War, he was the de facto, the broken Alliance War champion that was nuking all the bosses down and doing a ton of things. And they changed the Alliance War boss node, where his biggest party trick went away because there's no more True Strike. Now, obviously, he still has a role to play in Alliance Wars, and he is being actively used, but it is, again, significantly lower. And Battlegrounds, his presence is relatively minor, because he's not quite as fast as some of the alternatives. So ultimately, I did not include him. I do think he's a great champion, but I do think that there are many, many amazing champions in Cyclass. Another champion that kind of breaks my heart not to include in this list is Captain America Infinity War, because fact of the matter is he is not a current champion. The only place where you really see him at the moment is in the modders deck in Battlegrounds, because for whatever reason all the modders seem to love him, but realistically he does not get used much in Battlegrounds in virtually any of the metas. And then on top of it, you know, you can see him in Alliance War extremely seldom. His biggest strength by far is the ability to cover major ground throughout, you know, Act 5, 6, 7, and so on and so forth, and he's very stable and reliable champion. It's just the case, just like with Colossus and a handful of other champions, what he does is not necessarily at the moment in the trends, in the fashions, and no matter how much I love the character, and I truly do, there's just no competitive space really for him anymore. If you do like the character, obviously you can rank him, you can use him, and you will find, you know, your place for him, but ultimately he does not appear in the game too much in any competitive situation. And there are more champions that I need to give big disclaimers to as well, like Anti-Venom. Anti-Venom is a champion that is in fact growing in popularity, and we are starting to see him more and more, but he is still definitely a fairly acquired taste. He's not necessarily a, you know, a very visible presence in any of the game modes really. In Battlegrounds he does appear, especially for some specific metas, but overall, you know, no matter how much I like the champion, I like him enough so that I took him to rank 4 very recently. And I'm not going to be putting him in the top 10 either, because I do think there are 10 champions that have deserved the spot above him. Then we have She-Hulk, who also is and forever will be extremely powerful champion. But again, what she does is not necessarily, you know, being in the highest demand right now. And we have a list without Void, because Void at the moment still has, you know, some presence in the game, but again, in neither one of the categories that we are primarily looking at, Void is necessarily excelling much, and he's more of a, I don't want to say niche, but fairly seldom included in Battlegrounds decks, fairly seldom used in high-tier Alliance Wars, fairly seldom relied upon in questing. And again, it's not because Void has gotten any worse. Void's still amazing champion. It's just that Science Class has gotten overall so much better. And there are 2 last champions that will inevitably get people pissed off. There are 3 champions that will inevitably get people pissed off, because again, Science Class is just so good. But barely, I did not include Joe Fixit. I do think that you can make an argument for him on like spot number 10, because I will explain that spot number 10 placement in a second. But Joe Fixit is increasing in popularity. We are seeing more and more Joe Fixit, be that Alliance War defense. We are seeing him more and more for questing situations, Act 7 story content, things like that. And obviously Battlegrounds, both attacker and defender. He's definitely starting playing bigger role, and I do think, you know, there is a very good potential that his rise in usage and popularity and demand can still go up and can still increase, and it was a very solid buff. I love Joe Fixit buff. I use him a ton as well, but I did end up leaving him out just like I did left out Overseer, and this one pains me as well, because Overseer is awesome. I like his ability kit. I like making fun of him for looking like a hipster in Starbucks, writing a random screenplay that nobody will ever see, complaining that he's broke even though he's drinking $20 mocha latte frappuccino with extra sprinkles, wearing fluffy flip-flops to Starbucks, and probably smelling like weed. Either way, his ability kit is awesome. He does work great for Battlegrounds. And that's kind of it. He's not necessarily, again, a top on challenge content and things like that, and he definitely, again, has some relatively small presence in Alliance Wars, but not that great either. So ultimately, all things considering, and because this is not just a Battlegrounds ranking, I did not include him. And the final champion that could have easily made is Miles. I do think Miles has taken a bit of a backseat recently, but I still find a ton of value in his kit. But now we're going to have to go to the actual top 10. This is where the video starts. I'm sorry for the long 11.5-minute rambling at the start, but let's get down to business. I gave top 10 spot to Thing, because it is unquestionable that Thing is garnering much more attention. And even though virtually none of these lists feature champions that are used exclusively for defense, Thing makes it up there because he isn't. And that is one thing that people often mistake about Thing, because they look at him as only a defender primarily because of Battlegrounds, because, yeah, on Battlegrounds you're pretty much ever going to bring him on defense, because, you know, he's not the fastest Chad. But Thing has had a significant increase of use or continued staple use in virtually every area of the game, which is why I did have to edge him out over Overseer or like Spider-Man 2099 or Joe Fixit. Because Thing is, number one, staple Battlegrounds defender in vast majority of the metas. Number two, is staple Alliance War defender in majority of the metas, but he also does see play on Alliance War attack at the highest levels, because he happens to be shock and bleed immune, and also can deal with unstoppable if need be. Therefore, he does get used for hazard shift lanes. And then also, it is extremely important to note that Thing is nullify immune, which lets him often be an off-brand solution to stuff like Power Snack or Buffet nodes. And most importantly, he does see that Strike Counter, Fury, Joint fight still. I know that Kabam took away 2 of those fights for different set of nodes, but Strike Counter Fury still exists, last I checked, or existed for majority of the past 6 months, where he did see offensive use there as well. And then additionally to all of that, ultimately Incursions is also somewhat relevant game mode now, with a boost in rewards that has more and more people doing those runs, and there are very, very few champions that are used for Zone 25 Incursions runs, and arguably Thing alongside Hercules are the most important ones, so Thing definitely does get some bonus cookie points for that. And all those things combined, all those factors combined, we have seen a sharp, drastic rise in interest of this champion and usability. And obviously, you know, he's not the fastest, he's not the most glamorous rank up. He will be primarily largely used for defense, but what I'm trying to say is he always has had and some offensive uses and still does, and now some of them are more important than ever before in terms of incursions and Zone 25 pushes, or just in general trying to get as high as you can for those monthly rewards. So I did give spot number 10 to Thing. If you are absolutely detested by this placement and think that he does not deserve it, you can feel free to replace him with any of the champions that I gave special shout out, because again, all of them can make a relatively solid case for being in this top 10 list, such as Void, Overseer, Spider-Man 2099, Joe, Anti-Venom, so on and so forth. So there you go. Thing gets number 10. Let's move on to number 9. And number 9 is going to be a newcomer one. At number 9, I am going to give to Titania, because Titania has been in the game for a relatively brief amount of time. However, she was, I believe, the last champion that did get included in the current featured 6-star crystal. Therefore, she is fairly commonly available. And with that, we pretty much immediately have seen a very significant use of this champion. And we have seen significant use of this champion in the most competitive game modes as well. We see her in Alliance War attack as well, largely because of her ability to never have any buffs on her, because she's buff immune champion. And then on top of it all, obviously, if you time things right and if you're confident in her playstyle, you can use that Haymaker ability to tank infinite level 3s. And she definitely has, you know, fair amount of utility. And then on top of it, obviously, she is also a very, very, very solid Battlegrounds defender, and she can, Battlegrounds attacker, and she can be somewhat decent enough on defense to, in a pinch, you know, provide a bit of stalling to opponent, because in between delaying the fights with Haymakers and her massive health pool, which is one of the 20 biggest health pools in the game, she's fairly tanky as well. So ultimately, I do think that Titania at the moment is in spot number 9. I do believe that it is, you know, me going out on a bit of a limb because she's brand new, but at the same time, with the start that she has had so far in the game, I do expect her to remain a mainstay atop science class, and her popularity just to keep growing. She is one of the champions on my 1-2 rank up list in very, very near future as well, and hopefully that happens, and I get to prove exactly why I gave her spot number 9. And spot number 8 is a champion that is Devil himself. Is a champion that is a spawn of Satan and is the most evil creature to ever walk the halls of Mortal Kombat champions. If you are unsure about which champion I'm talking about that little damn pig. The little damn pig just will not go away. The little damn pig is everywhere at the moment, and I know that some people were quite quick to look away from the piggy with the release of Scorpion, but ultimately Piggy is still always there and everywhere. Piggy is used in Alliance for defense, and it is a mixture of the annoying power things being placed on you at times, taunt reducing your special attack damage, his ability to reduce special attack damage also, even though he has one of the smaller health pools, can occasionally appear to be extremely tanky. Therefore, he gives people a lot of problems, especially with his evade. And then on top of it, obviously, he has very weird clutch animations that still give a lot of people trouble. So he is a viable defender for both Alliance War and, if need be, in a pinch for Battlegrounds as well. I have lost fairly few matches to this little spawn of Satan on defense. And then obviously he is a great Battlegrounds attacker, and ultimately also does see play in other game modes as a questing champion, especially now that relics are coming into the play and there is effectively a dedicated Power Sting relic, which does synergize extremely well with the Piggy. And here we go. Piggy is here to stay, and I hate him. And apparently that hot dog in his hand is made from human meat, which absolutely does not surprise me. I can only imagine the cruelty, the grotesque smile on that swine's face when they are slaughtering innocent players like me for freaking hot dogs. Anyways, I think Piggy stays number 8, and I hate him. And that's the pig. Spot number 7. Spot number 7, and we're gonna give it to the handsome Chad over here, one of the more handsomest champions in the game, Immortal Abomination. And Immortal Abomination is one of those champions that at the moment I'm looking at in the game as extremely consistent, knows exactly what the champion is, not necessarily the best option for everything and so on and so forth, but ultimately he does have enough in his kit and he is reliable enough to be used virtually everywhere. He is a very stable questing champion whenever you need the science champs that inflict debuffs on opponent, or if you need access to poison. And then obviously he's used also as an Alliance War defender. He does have, you know, fairly decent synergizing capabilities with some of the nodes. And on top of it all, he is a constant presence in battlegrounds, both offensively and defensively. And one of the nastiest things about iBomb as a defender, obviously, is the fact that if you do not have that poison immune, you will basically get an auto L. So he does work as like a trapping champion in a sense. And then obviously offensively as well, he's not the fastest champion, but when it comes to dealing with those bulky and tanky mystics, he does solid enough of a job to basically get the work done there. So ultimately I do think spot number 7 for him is justified, based on the fact that, you know, he is present in all of the areas of the game. Maybe not the most popular choice for everything all at once, but he's again one of those champions that just puts in the work in the background. He does see Alliance War offensive play as well. He does definitely see defense. He does see battlegrounds offense and defense, and he is present for other scenarios in the game. And yeah, I think he's like a definition of kind of like a decent, solid science champion. In an aspect, he has access to Petrify, he has access to weakness, he has access to poison, doesn't have any buffs on his kit. He can benefit from going unblockable, whilst you have Acid Wash. Acid Wash in itself is an interesting bit of kit. Has increased physical resistance, and obviously quite suicide friendly. Now, there are some things that I'm personally not a fan of when it comes to this champion. Number one, I do personally believe that his stats are a bit mangled up, and he virtually has no damage until you do get to that level 2, unless you have had a very good RNG. So I'm not the biggest fan of that. I'm also not a fan of how Immortal Abomination has weaker poison damage, kind of like mitigation abilities than Diablo effectively has, where Diablo can heal more with poisons and stuff. But I do think they could have done slightly better job there, where you want to get more poisons off you, but you get less willpower healing for doing so. It still doesn't quite make sense to me, but ultimately I do think he's very, very solid science option. And now we're moving in top 5. And top 5, you know, I think is clear. I don't think anybody will question the top 5. I think people will question the order in top 5. I think everything up until this point, again, you could have make an argument for any of the champions that I mentioned before, that, you know, some of them should be in there, you could jiggle them up around. But I do think that there are two very distinct sections here. And ultimately, you know, if I did not have to keep this list in order with the other ones and be top 10, I would have top 5 and then 6 to 15, because that is more or less how I see the quality of science champions. And now we are going to arrive at the spot number 5, and spot number 5 at the moment. And listen, hear me out before you start yelling at me in the comments, because I can already hear that. It's like, yeah, this guy. Anyways, before you start yelling, spot number 5, Quicksilver. I do think that, you know, a champion does have potential to go higher. I do think there are very good reasons why I am not placing him, and therefore I will try to explain that the best I can. I think he's a solid character that will do a good enough job in kind of like longer problem fights and challenge modes, like we have seen him perform relatively well in a handful of Eternity of Pain fights. I do think that there will be some other similar contents coming out. He's going to do well, and you know, potentially Act 8 fights somewhere here and there. He will never be anybody's main or kind of like a casual science champion for a slower and shorter content, because ironically, of him being a speedster, even with the fastest rotations, he isn't all that fast in itself. And as a good testament to that is the simple fact that it takes double the time to land a combo with this character than it does with any other character who has a regular combo, not 14 hits. And by virtue of that, he gets to his level 2 much slower, and he does finish fights relatively slow. So I do think he is kind of a longer fight champion, which in itself is not necessarily, you know, a deal breaker. We do need plenty of those in as well, but that does pretty much mean that where there are suitable or better alternatives, people will go with them. For instance, many fights that Quicksilver would do in Alliance War well enough, because he effectively doesn't have any buffs in his kit and he doesn't get Dex buff, you know. You could use him as a buff immune champion, but nobody's going to do that. Everybody's going to go with Spider-Man 2099, or they're going to go with Titania, most likely these days, because that will be just safer, faster, more straightforward fight. Or very few people will, should I say. And similar things with Battlegrounds, In Battlegrounds, he can take handful of matchups in a pinch offensively, but at the moment, he's used just as a defender 9 times out of 10 minimum. And on top of that, I do think as a defender, he's currently benefiting largely from that new champion aspect because of his wonky animations. People are still getting to know how to fight him. And within the next month or 2 or 3, he's going to be significantly less valued as a defender. Kind of like the same case that happened with, Iron Man, Infinity War, and a handful of other champions. Ultimately, however, there is no arguing with his kit. And his kit does hold almost the top potential in Science class. But as well, it doesn't matter how many tools you have on your tool belt. What it matters is how often you can use them and how well do they work. He does have very good toolbox. He does have access to, slow debuff, bypassing Evade Unstoppable. He can bypass Miss. Has access to a ton of debuffs. He has access to Withers, stopping opponent's power gain, and all that is super useful, and there's no denying it. Hence, he is at the top 5. Again, his uniqueness, his quirkiness, his playstyle, and perhaps most importantly also his animations, however, in my opinion, are at the moment holding him back. A lot of people are just either unwilling or annoyed by that basic combo animation, and his playstyle being basically just like a build-up ramp burst champion. And I don't think there's any arguing that his burst damage is not necessarily as well integrated as, let's say, Gallon's, who accesses his burst much quicker and has much smaller limit to it. Gallon can burst max of 200k. This guy can burst over 1 million, but it does require much more maintenance and upkeep. So here we are. I do think that Quicksilver is very, very good. As a champion, obviously has the prestige factor. I also don't think at the moment he is the best or he is exceptionally popular. I think a lot of his popularity is still driven by the fact that he's a new champion. He has high prestige. He's quite new and tricky to fight against. To find his true ranking, I actually skipped one position in between Quicksilver. Right. Quicksilver is 5th. I have made a blunder that will edit real life. So this is number 5. Quicksilver is 5. I skipped over position number 6. My apologies. Position number 6, I'm going to give it to Spot. Spot is 6th. 6th, below Quicksilver. I do think that Spot has the capabilities of going over Quicksilver, and giving Spot number 6 is already me going on a huge leap of faith. However, I have seen some of the most incredible Spot gameplay from Battlegrounds, from rest of the game, and the most important thing is Spot does something that most of the Science characters don't. He nukes stuff down. And that is one of the things that Science characters largely are missing. Vast majority of the most effective Science characters do stuff great, but not necessarily the fastest, with like exception of Torch and maybe Scorpion. But Spot is a Science nuke, which is, as important as Mystic Class getting a Juggernaut and Tigra. Spot is that champion. He obviously does have plenty of unique abilities where he can take 0 block damage as soon as he has like one of his Spot charges active. Then he has access to a ton of Rupture. He has access to Untouchable. But ultimately, I don't think any of his utilities really is his selling point. His selling point is the fact that you get your level 2 and you nuke stuff down. That is going to be his selling point. Similar to Juggernaut. Juggernaut has the Unstoppable. Juggernaut has the Nullify if he's awakened. Immune to reverse controls, a few other bits. Nobody really cares that much about all those utilities. They're handy. But the most important thing is that he's going to be easy to use, straightforward, Science nuke with reasonable amount of utilities, as in access to Rapture, access to, Untouchable can be there. If need be, in a pinch, he has access to buff immunity and he doesn't get any buffs on his base. All that stuff is going to be what makes him cool. Also, ability to block majority of the, let's say, unavoidable damage special attacks, with taking no damage or effectively no damage, is going to be very, very great. So, I do think Spot, when he comes out proper, when more people have access to him, he's going to make his way in top 5 Science. I do think so. I do believe so. And At the moment, I'm placing him as 6th because of 2 reasons. Number 1, to demonstrate that I do have quite a huge expectations of this character to a point that I am willing to go out on a limb and, you know, put my name next to it. And I am also not putting him in obviously 5 because he does have quite a lot to prove. So I do think Spot is number 6 at the moment. I can easily see him making top 5. If he doesn't, fair enough, but he's going to be great. And obviously Spot will 100% without doubt already is fulfilling functions in Alliance War defense. He's doing questing for the people that do have him. He's great in Battlegrounds offensively and defensively, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him in Alliance War attack as well. So I'm giving Spot number 6. 6. Remember that. Because Quicksilver is number 5. We already discussed everything about Quicksilver. I do think that Quicksilver is a crazy good character. I do think that there are some issues with basically landing his usefulness with the content, but nothing that can't potentially be overcome should the situation call for it. Now let's move on to spot number 4, and at the moment I'm going to give it to Mr. Negative. Because Mr. Negative is still de facto the best game's answer to degeneration, where he can actually heal from the degen, and also ultimately because he is present in Alliance War, and he is present in Battlegrounds as one of the most effective science champions that counter very, very large amount of most annoying Mystic champions. Almost all of the hard to kill Mystics, if not all of them, can be taken down extremely quickly with Mr. Negative. Alliance War, Mr. Negative did take a backseat in the last couple of months, largely due to the metas. However, I do fully expect him to make a comeback in very near future as well. And he does have unique qualities, and ultimately, again, I do personally look at Mr. Negative as a champion worthy of the 4th spot, because there is a lot of utility that is used daily, a lot of utility that can come into play occasionally, but is still important to have access to. And we have seen how great he can be in some of the Eternity of the Pain fights. We definitely do see it every, season in Battlegrounds. And we do see in majority of the seasons in Alliance Wars. So I do think that Mr. Negative, especially with more and more dedicated players unlocking new ways how to play him with like that Valkyrie synergy, for instance, where you can just play him effectively like a Quake in the corner and pause your degens indefinitely and a whole bunch of other things. He's one of those characters that's unique, hard to master, but holds a very good amount of power. Mr. Negative, again, also to be perfectly clear, is not a champion I recommend ranking up to people that aren't confident or familiar with him, because I have seen this so many times that, somebody does something cool with Mr. Negative in a video. Next thing you know, there is a guy with rank 4 Negative getting KO'd in 30 seconds by a Sasquatch. He's one of those champions where you do want to put in practice, you do want to know what you're doing, you do want to know exactly why you're doing what you're doing with him, and then you want to commit to, kind of like with Ghost, kind of like with Tigra. But if you do, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised, and he can take definitely bigger variety of matchups than people give him credit for as well. And now we are in top 3. And top 3, oh boy. Top three is kind of hard to decide. And I am still going to give spot number 3, well, position number 3, place number 3. The bronze medal is going to go to Mr. Fantastic. And it actually kind of pained me a bit, because previously I put him as second best science champion, and I don't think I was wrong. I think, if anything, I have been proven right. Because Mr. Negative, and again, there will be that MCOC player that only cares about big yellow numbers and, pew, pew, pew. And they will never like him. Mr. Fantastic is not going to give you the biggest yellow numbers, but he does have deceptively good damage output for majority of the things in game. Admittedly, he's not necessarily the strongest hitting champion, let's say for Battlegrounds and that level fights exactly, but he is fast enough to be utilized offensively in Battlegrounds, and we do see him take down some of the most frustrating fights in Battlegrounds, like Sasquatches, like Rintras, like Man-Things, like a whole bunch of other things. So there is a definite value in that. Again, Mars, Longshots, so on and so forth. And we obviously see him as a defender as well, because he can be extremely frustrating to deal with. He is, at this point, a staple in Alliance War, with no question. And not primarily because of his pre-fights. His pre-fights are useful, are used, are super helpful, without a doubt. But he himself, as a champion, is doing it all in all the game modes that matter, really. He does take some of the trickiest fights in this game, and the reason why he is so good and why people rely on him so much is because he's extremely consistent, straightforward, stable, and reliable. And that's like one of those differences with many champions that Mr. Negative has, is when you start the fight with that Petrify active, already significantly mitigating all the effects. Only thing you have to do is get to one level 2 and you virtually, at that point you're already heal reversing. If you have max despair, you mitigate any power gain opponents might have by 80%. You likely have shut down their combat power rate. And he gives you one of the, if not the best controls in the fight that you can ask for. It's kind of like a Doom levels of power where it doesn't matter what opponent really does. In Mr. Fantastic's case, typically if you do make a massive mistake, he's just going to evade out of it anyways. But ultimately also, especially combined with Inequity, even if you do get hit, it's not overly punishing. He is quite tanky. And he just gets the job done so damn well and reliably. And again, all that utility in between his own abilities and the pre-fights does put him atop of Science class, and quite frankly is in, like, I think the game, Again, he's not the fastest, he's not the flashiest, but if you are at this point underestimating this character, it is 100% of you on you, not on Mr. Negative, because he has done nothing but went from strength to strength to strength in game mode to game mode to game mode. Extremely reliable and well-balanced character. But I had to downgrade him to number 3 position, unfortunately. Because one of the newcomers is just kicking it off. One of the new coming champions is putting in work everywhere, and is again one of the craziest champions added this year, and that does say quite a lot. And Scorpion is second. If you are a Liquid Courage Double Edge player, there is a very good argument that Scorpion is the best champion, but we're going to put that aside. Ultimately, I do think Scorpion deserves second spot, because Scorpion does pack a great amount of utility in his kit. I do think Scorpion's unique rupture immunity is a legitimate value and gem at the moment in the game, as we are getting more and more champions who have and utilize rupture. Ultimately, let's break this down logically. You synergize him up for any content with that Venom synergy or anti-Venom synergy, giving him those Furies, and he has potential of some of the craziest damage in the game. If you line things up correctly, you can do like 1,000,000 or 800,000 burst with Scorpion, which is just insane. And obviously his base hits and everything else can do a ton of damage with that synergy too. Even without that synergy, his damage output, however, is, more realistic, I would say, for a Science champion. But it's still up there. He can finish Battlegrounds fights extremely quickly, thanks to his burst, obviously. And then, parts of his kit kind of remind people of, let's say, Scout with Black Widow Clairvoyant, in a sense that he does have these 3 immunity access and 3 debuff access, but you kind of have to pick 1 at a time, or in case of immunities, 2 at a time. But it still works in virtually all the matchups where you need a specific immunity, you can go for it. And then also I love the fact that he can switch in between specifically a debuff that does energy damage, specifically a debuff that does physical damage, and a poison that does direct damage and has additional bits of utility added to it. So I do think he's extremely well balanced, and that comes in play before even we consider his Awakened ability, which lets him block unblockable special attacks from all class champions, which is extremely powerful. And also ability to siphon opponent's heal and have access to Petrify as well, have access to Taunt. I think he's extremely well-made character, an absolute success story. We see him in Battlegrounds, both as attacker and defender. We see him in Alliance War, both as an attacker and defender, and we see him everywhere across the contest. So I do think it's quite hard to deny the fact that he has been one of the most successful champions released this year, and is currently one of the strongest science champions. On top of it, it is quite cool to see him with super high attack rating and an absolutely insane block proficiency. Slight energy and physical resist is also quite neat. But yes, Scorpion is that good. And again, if you don't think Scorpion's a good champion, that's likely on you. Because he is. And then that leaves us with our number one. And that's Torch. Torch still does what Torch does, which basically is wherever he arrives, he is one of the biggest threats that can possibly exist. You know, he is one of the most banned champions in any of the places where you can ban something. He is a staple of virtually any deck. He's one of those champions where if you don't have a 6-star, you will still rank up a 5-star. He completely shuts down virtually the entire Mystic class and increasingly large amount of champions that do energy damage. And that is just, you know, fueling his strength. The fact that absolutely nothing is immune to No Flames, and the fact that you can use that No Flames for every single Battlegrounds fight you are going to take with this champion, make him borderline bonkers, specifically for Battlegrounds. Obviously, we know that he is also absolutely bonkers for Alliance War. His ability to completely nuke down the opponents. I think I saw Alliance War clip where he basically blocked a bunch of hits and then just got hit a bunch of times and like landed maybe 1 or 2 hits on opponent, and he was like fully boosted up and he just killed the opponent faster than he could have been killed. And then obviously, yes, like all the story content, all the challenge content, everything, he is one of those champions where we kind of head to immediately. As in, like, if we know that there is going to be something where he works well enough to be our default answer for it. We see a bunch of Mystic champions, torch it. We see a bunch of energy damage champions, torch it. You see, you know, it is crazy. And also the fact that he's kind of simple, you know. He doesn't have access to 90 different debuffs and different pieces of utility. He doesn't have, you know, petrifies and taunts and slows and things like that. What he does is incinerate and No Flames, and he does have some passive power things if he has No Flames active, and then what? That's it. You know, there's not much else going on. His incinerate obviously does have the ability to reverse healing, which is also quite important. But he's simple, he's straightforward, and he is dangerous. He is dangerous. Also, it's kind of interesting that due to the increasing amount of champions that are energy damage based, he can be used as a trap in Battlegrounds, which is quite funny, which is one of the most annoying things to experience, is when somebody torch traps you. It's similar to when somebody traps you with Eye Bomb, but at least, you know, that doesn't hit you as hard of an insult as an insult, but Torch Trap is just nasty. And yeah, I do genuinely think that Torch is still the dominant champion. I also do think that Torch is well worth taking to rank 4 if you have a moderately or large sized account at this point. I don't think that Torch is necessarily a champion you wanted to rank as your first, second, third, or fourth rank 4, but if you are going, you know, on 10 plus rank 4s, I do think Torch is worth it. Because rank 4s matter mainly in competition to other players, and when you are competing with them, you do want to have the bigger gun, should the exchange occur of torches, let's say. But anyways, I don't know at this point what has to happen for Torch to get dethroned. And I don't want to say it out loud in case somebody from Kabam is listening, because I don't know how much better you can make science champions without going into the realm of ridiculous. And Torch still better. Like, I do think, you know, when we're looking at Scorpion, I think it's about as well made science champion as you can potentially make. There's potential for insane damage synergized. There is great damage unsynergized. There's untold levels of utility. And I still think Torch is better. So that does open kind of like interesting point there. Like, what would Kabam have to do with their next science champion for it to be better than Torch? I just don't quite see it. Which obviously leaves us with a bit of a scary prospect. Hood. Or something. Or... Anyways. Let me know what you guys are thinking. How would you have ranked up these champions? This time around, I will not forget to show you all the new rankings. So here you can see the new rankings. Number 1, Torch. Number 2, Scorpion. Number 3, Mr. Fantastic. Number 4, Mr. Negative. Number 5, Quicksilver. Number 6, Spots. Number 7, Eyebomb. Number 8, Spider-Ham. Number 9, Titania. Number 10, The Thing. Or just Thing. It's kind of cool that 3 out of 4 Mr. Fantastic Four champions are in top 10 now. Quite like that. Anyways, I hope you guys like this list. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, even if you didn't like the list, because how else will you know when I upload something that you can argue about? And that is it. We only have the Cosmic class left. I will try my best to have it out tomorrow. However, it's weekend and there are loads of things happening, and I'm juggling a ton of stuff. So there might be, you know, a break for a day or two from these videos, because these do take a lot of time, a lot of mental energy, and a lot of head scratching and thinking and, you know, information processing, and they do take out quite a lot of me. So, if not for anything else, then at the very least, give me that A for effort, and I'll catch you guys later. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about